Greetings and welcome back to room 303 in our talks with Walt. We are now in poem number 3 of the Leaves of Grass section at the very beginning of the deathbed edition called Inscriptions in Cabin Ships at Sea. This, of course, is going to be for us one of the first moments now that we will meet the symbolism that will be so significant in so much of our reading. Now let's talk really quickly about some of the assumptions, because I'm hoping that you're working at Learn Strong with me and with us together down that left-hand side, learnstrong.net, and you are paying attention to some of the earlier lectures, because I'm going to build through these lectures. And so that's the hope already, is that previous lectures have been watched as we remind ourselves we are the stories that we tell and retell. Maybe we will say the stories we chant and rechant, sing and re-sing. And of course, we're also the stories that we accept or decide to reject. We also assume our learning theory is under your control, connecting new information to old information. We say the new is the new, the NEW is the KNEW. So we're always trying to make these connections so that we can hold on to something that matters to us. We also assume that you're familiar with our annotative approach at level 1. What does the text say? Summary at level 2. What does the text mean? 2A, themes, messages at 2B. Rhetorical kinds of techniques, literary techniques, poetic techniques. Whitman, we want to point out, is just a great, great craftsman. I mean, we'll see this in some of the iambic pentameter games that we're going to play here already early on, and in one of the early poems of Leaves of Grass. And then finally at level 3, how can I relate to this information at 3A to other texts, especially, of course, other poems from Leaves of Grass? And then finally, and most importantly for our learning theory, can I relate to this information in some way? If we're doing anything, and I hope that you've got your own copy of Leaves of Grass, and I hope that it's the deathbed edition, and I hope that you're annotating as you go, and I hope that after you finish with one of our conversations that you spend some time pondering, is the word from the previous poem, that you're pondering and thinking about it, and I hope that you can begin to own the material on your own. We also assume, of course, familiarity with what we call in 303 our Big Five. That is to say, what does this text say about what you can know? Epistemology, we're going to have a lot to say about that here. About ontology and who we are, as well as psychology, the study of the individual mind, and sociology, the study of the collective group mind. And then finally, and this will come up in this poem as well, the question of theodicy, that is to say the challenges that will be significant in our lives. To ask the question, not why did this happen to me, but rather why did this happen for me? Whitman is a huge believer that pain and suffering is a propedeutic, instructional, didactic in some way, if one is willing to delve, to go deep into the questions of the importance of pain and suffering. Finally, our 5 P's, as we will say, the 5 perspectives on Whitman. We're interested in Whitman from all these perspectives and more. I mean, this is not obviously an exhaustive list. Whitman is person. He was a historical figure. Whitman is poet. Whitman is pedagogue or instructor. He was a teacher, and he started out as a teacher. We mustn't forget that. Whitman is politician and a true believer in democracy. And then finally, Whitman is philosopher. From the pre-Socratics and Socrates, of course, through the great Emerson himself. Now, we always like to begin by looking a little bit at some background information. This poem published in 1871, and it really is concerned with the destiny of Leaves of Grass, we should point out. There's as well some other information that we want to point out. This was first published, as we said, in 1871 in the positions that they now occupy, this poem starting there. Now, a friend of Whitman's, W.S. Kennedy, he was as well a commentator, he said in 1907 the following: this poem was suggested by a passage in Pindar's 5th Ode, the great Pindar. It's amazing that Whitman only had an elementary education. By the age of 17 was already a teacher in country schoolrooms, and then was self-taught by and large. I mean, he would sit down and he would read, and his knowledge is remarkable, what he knows. We think, of course, of Shakespeare as having tremendous gifts like Whitman. Pindar said it this way, quote, "Speed thou thy dulcet play in every bark and pinnace o'er the deep," end quote. As well, we want to point out there's a certain kind of structural regularity in this poem. We have 3 stanzas of 8 iambic lines each, beginning and ending with shorter lines. Of course, the iambic beat, ba-bum, 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 that's our 5 iambic pentameter beat. Here we're going to have 8 of these iambic lines, each beginning and ending, notice, with shorter and and with longer lines. Now, let's go ahead and turn specifically to the poem itself, as we've done in previous presentations, and just enjoy reading the poem. By the way, notice the elided use of in cabin. Notice the dropping of the E, again, as we said in previous lectures. This notion of trying to capture the American vernacular. Whitman is intuitively trying to make his poems American, but at the same time universal. And this is, of course, why he's read as much in China as he will be read in America. It's quite remarkable. In chambered ships at sea. Of course, the sea is going to be one of the compelling metaphors of Leaves of Grass, so put that in your notes. Sailing is going to be one of them. We'll think about Yeats's Sailing to Byzantium, right? That is no country for old men, the young in one another's arms, birds in the trees, those dying generations of their song. Yeats, of course, influenced by Whitman, as so many poets of the 20th century were, even though I often denied it, right? In cabin ships at sea, the boundless blue on every side expanding, with whistling winds and music of the waves, the large, imperious waves. Or some lone bark buoyed on the dense marine, where, joyous, full of faith, spreading white sails, she cleaves the ether mid the sparkle and the foam of day, or under many a star at night. By sailors young and old, haply, will I, a reminiscence of the land, be read in full report at last. Here are our thoughts, voyagers' thoughts. Here, not the land, firm land alone appears, may then by them be said. The sky o'erreaches here. We feel the undulating deck beneath our feet. We feel the long pulsation, ebb and flow of endless motion. The tones of unseen mystery, the vague and vast suggestions of the briny world, the liquid flowing syllables, the perfume, the faint creaking of the cordage, the melancholy rhythm, the boundless vista and the horizon far and dim are all here. And this is ocean's poem. Then falter not, O book, fulfill your destiny. You, not a reminiscence of the land alone, you, too, as a lone bark cleaving the ether, proposed. I know not whither, yet ever full of faith, consort to every ship that sails, sail you, bear forth to them folded my love. Dear mariners, for you I fold it here in every leaf. Speed on, my book, spread your white sails, my little bark, athwart the imperious waves. Chant on, sail on, bear o'er the boundless blue, from me to every sea, this song for mariners and all their ships. Right away, notice the genius of the rhythm, right? So, I mean, we have the iambic rhythm, and as we scan this line, right, we won't play that game over and over again, but just to remind, Whitman is up against the great Longfellow. Tell me not in mournful numbers, life is but an empty dream, for the soul is dead that slumbers, and things are not what they seem. Bum, ba, bum, ba, bum, ba, bum, ba, bum, ba, bum. That was considered the poetry of the day. It's not that Whitman can't play that game. He certainly can. Notice it in here, in chambered ships at sea, the boundless blue on every side expanding, with whistling winds and music of the waves. Do you hear it? The large imperious waves, ba-bum, ba-bum, ba-bum. And of course it makes sense to play the game of iambic when you're messing around with a word picture about a ship on a sea where there's rocking back and forth. We think of those opening lines of the genius of Conrad in Heart of Darkness, as Marlowe's telling his story there, moored on the Thames, and you have that rocking motion in the prose. Go back and look at our lecture on that one. We're playing a very similar kind of game. Let's put it in our notes. Whitman as poet is a great listener. I mean, we would say this as person as well. Great listener. We're told that he loved to talk and enjoy conversations, and so he's a great listener of the rhythms of nature, and so we'll see it right away here. Notice in cabin ships at sea, and then you have the repetition of the B sounds. In Boundless, it's one of our important words in Leaves of Grass, by the way, write it down. Blue on every side, expanding, he loves this word as well, the idea of always expanding. It's going to be an idea of that always dynamism, that we would call evolution, right? With, notice here's repetitions of the W sounds, with whistling winds and music of the waves, again, one of the key metaphors of Leaves of Grass. The large, imperious waves, we cannot help but think of Odysseus as Poseidon is coming after him before he arrives on the land of the Phaeacians, right? Or some lone bark. We think of Sonnet 116, it is the start of every wandering bark. Here, bark, of course, meaning a ship alone out at sea. We can't help but think of the Odyssey in a set of lines like this. On the dense marine, that is to say, the ocean. And here immediately we think of Coleridge and his Rime of the Ancient Mariner. And of course we've given detailed lectures on Rime of the Ancient Mariner, but the beauty of the marine life, right, that will require our mariner after he has killed his albatross to bless all of the life unawares, and then of course the albatross will fall. Where joyous, a key word, right? And we said it in Tintern Abbey with Wordsworth in our lecture there, we'll say it here, joyous, full of faith. And again, this idea of faith is such an important word for Whitman growing up as a Quaker. The idea of what it is that you believe. As we've often pointed out, Whitman will say this. Okay, you know what you don't believe. You know what you don't have faith in. Fine. What do you believe in? Say that out loud. And then try to answer the question how you're going to make that thing come true. Full of faith. Notice, spreading white sails. Whitman loved to watch the boats out on the ocean. She, this little boat, this of course being the symbol of Leaves of Grass, cleaves the ether. And of course the ether here is going to take us back to our study of Aristotle. Of course this is his idea of the rarefied, right, upper spaces as Aristotle would talk about it. The ether mid the sparkle, Whitman loves this word sparkle, and the foam of day, or under many a star at night. We cannot help but think of Shakespeare's Sonnet 116. Whitman loved the sonnets, as did, of course, Keats. Loved the sonnets of Shakespeare. By sailors young and old, and then, of course, the word happily, will I, a reminiscence. Remember, Whitman will argue, the only sin is to forget. Reminiscence of the land be read in full report. And the word report here takes us back to the previous poem and the idea of war and fighting at last. And of course this idea at last takes us to Longfellow's Psalm of Life, a poem that Whitman knew well. Let us then be up and doing with a heart for any fate, still achieving, still pursuing, learn to labor and to, right, patience, wait. Notice it's Whitman who argues that my little collection of poems, I hope, will at last somehow bring to memory who I was, what my project was, reminiscence of the land. And then in the italics. And we're going to have in Whitman this anaphoria, as it's referred to. The repetition of first words over and over. Here it's going to be the word here, right? Watch it. And watch how this happens all the way through Leaves of Grass. Here are our thoughts. Voyagers' thoughts. Now, Whitman was a great lover of Tennyson, and of course Tennyson's Ulysses that we've lectured on elsewhere, that to follow knowledge like a sinking star beyond the utmost bounds of human thought has to be here. And you can hear the rhythm, right? To follow knowledge like a sinking star beyond the utmost bounds of human thought, playing the exact same kind of game here, right? Here, not the land, firm land alone appears, may then by them be said. The sky or reaches here. Notice again, we're back to the elated kind of verbs here. We feel the undulating deck. He loves this word undulating, this movement back and forth beneath our feet. We feel, notice the repetition of the word feel, the long pulsation, the emphasis of the word long, pulsation, ebb and flow of endless motion, this movement back and forth like the ocean and the water. Ebb and flow, of course, is going to be huge. Out of the cradle endlessly rocking will come to mind immediately. The tones of unseen mystery, the enigma, the mystery is central as well to the study of Leaves of Grass. The vague and vast suggestions of the briny world. I love the word suggestions, to suggest, to imply, to just raise a question. And Whitman will do this all the time. Hey, what about this idea? He comes across as almost being like he hasn't even really thought much about it. But wait, what are you thinking? What are you thinking about this? What are your thoughts about this? This idea of suggestions in the briny world, the liquid flowing syllables. That is to say, the melodic language. The opera very much influenced, as we said in previous lectures, Whitman's work. And he really did believe that great poetry should be read aloud, said aloud, recited aloud. Whitman, a great believer in reciting after memorization. Of course, some of you are smiling because we do so much of that in 303. We commit to memory sets of lines so that we can then recite them, sometimes to each other, right, as we stand in the center of 303, right? Then, of course, it's about the smell. Notice all the senses being referenced here. The perfume, later it'll be armpit smell. It'll be smells of everything. Everything is open for Whitman to be celebrated. The perfume, the faint creaking of the cordage. You hear, of course, these ropes in the ship's rigging, right? And we immediately think of the Song of the Sirens and Odysseus being tied to the mast. And then, interestingly, the adjective melancholy rhythm. The boundless, we're back to that word from earlier in the second line. Vista, the horizon, far and dim, are all here. And this is Ocean's poem. Now, what an amazing line. This is Ocean's poem. In other words, the poem belongs to you, but it also belongs to the ocean. Why? Because the ocean is representative of what? Everything symbolic of greatness, majesty, prodigious kinds of potentialities. Think about when the poem's being published and the idea that the world is being circumnavigated by ships and, of course, going out. I mean, you cannot help but think about Melville's Moby Dick as well. And, of course, Melville always struggling with Whitman to know exactly where to place him on that spectrum of greatness. Then, we're back now outside of italics. Falter not, O book. He considered from the very beginning that he was going to write a collection of poems called Leaves of Grass. We'll get to the title in a bit. That would be his book. That would be his way of talking about the very thing that at the end of the deathbed edition he would call his fancy, his love, his book. Fulfill your destiny. Now, of course, this idea of the destiny, manifest destiny, the destiny of America, the destiny of his book, they're tied together, as he will say elsewhere. And then again, anaphoria, the repetition of first words. Notice the you and the you. You, not a reminiscence of the land only. You, too, is a lone bark. He loves this word picture, out there all alone on cleaving the ether. And again, we're back to the word again. Purposed, I know not whither, the infallible disposition. In other words, I don't know how this book's going to end up. Yet, ever full of faith, we're back again to this notion of faith. Consort to every ship that sails, sail you. He's aware. The great texts are like ships set off onto the ocean to sail. He wants to be one of those ships. And of course, if we think about the way that the Aeneid opens, obviously, there we are on ships. I mean, it's genius the way that Whitman can combine so many great stories together. And then he says it, bear forth to them folded. And this enfolding is a beautiful word picture, and we're going to see it over and over again in Leaves of Grass. My love. Now, of course, this every ship that sails is the inclusivity that will become a hallmark of Whitman. It's why we love America and why we love America's poet Whitman, the inclusivity. We're all included in this somehow. And yet notice here it's my love. And again, we're back. The very last poem will elicit the same kind of language of love. And then in parentheses, dear mariners. And we cannot help but think of Tennyson's Ulysses, my mariners, souls that have toiled and wrought and fought with me, that ever with a frolic welcome took the thunder and the sunshine and opposed free hearts, free foreheads. You and I are old. Old age hath yet its honor and its toil. Death closes all, but something ere the end. Some work of noble note may yet be done. Not unbecoming men that strove with gods. These lines have got to be here as we now introduce ourselves to the title of Leaves of Grass. Now, I know that in our talks thus far, I haven't really commented very much on the title, the strange title, Leaves of Grass. What a strange title. Let's now pay attention a little bit to the title. Notice, dear mariners, for you I fold it here in every leaf. Now let's pause for a moment in your notes and let's take a few notes on the very topic of Leaves of Grass, this title, okay? Now I said something about this early on in some of our conversations, but now we're really going to talk about it. Now I have to tell you, as I've said in earlier lectures, I've been heavily influenced by so many great thinkers about these collections of poems, and of course anything else that we speak of in 303. What is it Tennyson says in Ulysses? I'm a part of all that I have met, and I think this has to be said out loud. But the great Harold Bloom has deeply influenced so much of what I want to say. A great lover, of course, of Whitman and, of course, of Leaves of Grass. And I want to give my, right out front, my observations regarding the importance of Bloom to our interpretations of so much of what I'm going to say. He made it a point, though, the importance of the title. If you don't understand why the title is called Leaves of Grass and all of the different things that are happening there, let's just spend a few moments pointing it out. We're going to pay attention, for example, to how Leaves of Grass will allude, A-L-L, right? Allude to, for example, the Iliad. Now, of course, I've given full lectures on these titles, so I'm just going to reference really quickly from the Fagles translation. How about this one from Iliad 6? We, of course, are here with that great exchange between Glaucus and Diomedes, and we have to size each other up to make sure that, in fact, are you, in fact, worthy of fighting with me? And here, of course, Glaucus will make his observation, high-hearted son of Thetis, as he will talk about Diomedes, why ask about my birth? Like the generations of leaves. And again, I'm in Iliad 6, okay? Roughly line 116, depending upon your translator, right? Why ask about my birth? Like the generations of leaves, the lives of mortal men. Now the wind scatters the old leaves across the earth. Now the living timber bursts with the new buds, and spring comes round again. And so with men, as one generation comes to life, another dies away. But about my birth, if you'd like to learn it, first to last, though many people know it, here's my story. Now, of course, this beautiful idea of